One of the best supports in Honkai Star Rail, and also one of the most amazing designs as well. Let's go ahead and take it in terms of a kit and what makes this unit so special that everyone is praising her about. Her basic attack is very simple, you just smack an enemy, there's no enhanced version or anything. Her skill is where it gets a little bit tricky. When she uses her skill ability, she will buff a target and give them this passive benediction buff. We will see it in a little bit, let me explain what it means broadly first. It increases their attack by a certain percentage, up to 30% based on, of course, Tingyun's current attack, which means that she generally wants to have a higher attack amount so that she's able to buff the target that she's buffing. One thing to note is if your character that you're buffing is a 5-star, generally the 5-star stat scaling is much better, so she generally needs to build a lot more attack to catch up to that 5-star stats equivalent. As you can see, it's only up to 17% of her current attack. When the ally attacks with this buff, they will deal additional lightning damage. Let's take a look in terms of what this looks like in battle. I think it's a lot easier to understand. So we're going to buff Natasha. You will be able to see, for example, an additional purple number that appears. Right, so that is for in terms of the skill. Let's look next in terms of the ultimate ability. So as you can see here, it restores 50 energy to a single target and also increases their damage. Not only can you use it for your DPS characters, sometimes, for example, maybe let's say you are needing a bit of emergency sustain. Maybe your support like Natasha doesn't have her burst yet, and maybe your characters are about to die. You can use it as a strategic option to press Tingyun's ultimate, buff your healer's energy restoration. One thing that you guys might be wondering also at this point is, does that 50 scale with the character's energy restoration rate? And let's take a look real quick. So we can see here that Natasha has 6 energy. So by right, if it doesn't scale with energy restoration, this should be 56. If we see, for example, here she has 127 energy regeneration rate. So if it factors in this, it should be around 66. Let's go ahead and take a look right now. Okay, back into the menu and we take a look. So as we can see, 56 energy right here means that this doesn't actually scale with the energy regeneration rate in terms of the flat healing. So this now we know is a flat restoration, doesn't scale with energy restoration rate, which is very important to know as well. Next up, we have Violet Sparknado, her talent ability. When an enemy is attacked by Tingyun, the ally of benediction immediately deals additional lightning damage equal to 36% of the ally's attack to the same enemy. Basically what this means is when she attacks, the ally will also do like a joint attack on the same target. Means that they do more damage together. Tingyun's Tracers. In the long run, you want to level all of the 4 core ones up equally as well. But I think in the near term, especially if she's not doing a lot of basic attack damage, I think you can skip basic attack for the start. You want to focus mainly on the talent to give more buffing in terms of damage potential. You want to focus on ultimate as well as the skill so that you really get a tremendous amount of buffing ability. I think out of all of them, the one that matters most probably will be skill, because it scales much better with, for example, the amount that you buff, and scales better with Tingyun's current attack as well. So this is probably the most important. In my opinion, ultimate ability is less important, especially since the energy restoration is flat, doesn't really scale as well. And of course, the talent ability is nice to have, but then again, it's combined together with basic attack whenever Tingyun attacks as well. So I think those are like my priorities in terms of the major 4 tracers. Other than that, I think this is possibly one of the strongest major tracers that I've seen, Jubilant Passage. Reason why is it makes her scale very, very well with speed. And whenever she starts a turn, regenerates 5 energy. Super solid. Good amounts of energy refund. I wish every character had this. And now Subdual, this is nice towards the later part of the game when you are doing a lot more damage from Tingyun as well. I think this is very solid in terms of giving her more individual damage. Other than that, the major trace, Nourish Joviality, Tingyun's speed increases by 20% for 1 turn after using skill as well, so it gives her a bit of self-speed buff. What's important to know, of course, if you're running something that requires speed tuning, maybe a light cone that is particular on speed order, this might mess up your plans, because if you move too fast, the character that is acting after you might, for example, be a preservation unit. We'll talk about this a bit more in the light cone section as well. Other than that, I think all of the traces are pretty decent on her, but more so you want to go for the attack increases, because that is really what she scales off with in terms of her skill Soothing Melody, because it's based on her current attack. So she generally cares more about attack percentage early on, and later on you could of course get the remaining traits, tracers as well. Tingyun's Eidolons. Tingyun scales very well all the way to E6, but let's talk a bit about which are pretty decent and some things to consider when you activate the Eidolons as well. E1, it gains the ally with Benediction gains 20% speed for 1 turn. This one is a bit tricky because if you are playing with a 5-star Lightcone, which we'll talk about in the Lightcone section as well, Bronya's standard Lightcone you can get from the shop, that one has a component where after using Tingyun's skill, the next ally that moves get a 30% buff. By having an increased speed, you actually might make your speed tuning a little bit trickier in terms of the character might move before Tingyun and then you end up buffing, for example, your preservation unit. So those are some things to consider. Of course, it can be managed in-game as you're playing, but those are some inefficiencies that would come about and trouble would come about from E1. If you're not running Bronya's Lightcone or the 4-star equivalent, I think it's pretty fine, doesn't really matter. Very strong still to have more speed. Gainfully gives, givingly gains. I think this is okay as it's conditioned based on defeating an enemy and your ally gains 5 energy. It can only be triggered once per turn. Not the best, but it's definitely helpful for a bit more energy as well. Next up we have Jovial Versatility. This one's very strong, probably tied for her best with E6. Damage multiplier provided is increased by 20%, very high amounts of bonus, which plays exactly into a kit playstyle as well. And E6 of course, ultimate energy regenerates 10 more energy to the target ally, very good for getting up more uptime on the energy restoration. As those of you who know, in terms of her ultimate ability, she gives already 50 energy, so that is a 20% increase on top of that with E6. And a lot of characters, for example Natasha, has a very low energy requirement, so it gets that up even faster as well. Optimal relics. In an ideal world, I think Band of Sizzling Thunder is going to be really strong. For example, when we have unlimited resources and we can do as much farming as we want. Why lightning damage is good for her basic attacks, as well as when she uses her skill, her attack increases by 20% for 1 turn. This also is in line with her attack buffing scaling with her attack as well. So I think this is solid, but I think in a non-ideal world or being a bit more realistic, a lot of us towards the later part of the game will be or allocating more of these specialist set, for example the lightning sets, quantum set, fire set, just to name a few, towards our more like main DPS like maybe Tingyun, Serval, and we don't really want to use all these very solid attack gear for a character like that doesn't do like predominantly the most amount of damage on the team. So I think that is something to consider why this set would not be my best recommendation for the maybe the middle game. I think my proposal for a lot of us is the Musketeer of Wildweed. And here's the thing. As we go towards the end game, a lot of us will be shifting our main DPSs away from this set which we got so much of as we were farming throughout the game already. And a lot of us will be moving on towards more specialist set for our main DPSs. What this means is all your good gear that we have gotten throughout the game so far as we are progressing, you can just take this and slap on a very strong support who utilizes attack percentage, speed, which a lot of DPSs you probably have allocated to them as well. So I think this is a really good set in terms of an overall account efficiency point of view. It gives her speed, which she likes, good amounts of energy restoration, good amounts of action that she can take, which means indirectly more energy restoration too. Basic attack is her only damaging part of the 3 skill ultimate and basic attack for a kit. And attack 12% is very nice, unconditional, to help with her buffing as well. So I think these two are probably my primary sets that I will recommend. Maybe Musketeer, just a little bit higher for efficiency purposes. Eagle of Twilight Line is another maybe a niche set that you can consider. When you use the ultimate action advance by 25%, she definitely will appreciate more action advancing forward. A bit niche in my opinion, and one thing to note is if, for example, you're using Bronya's Lightcone on her, this might actually mess up your plans, because if you action advance by 25%, maybe the character acting right after is, for example, your preservation unit already after that. So that's something to take into consideration, but other than that, pretty decent if you ask me. Guard of Wuthering Snow, of course, is a pretty niche one, but nice as well. It gives her a bit more defensive position. When she's below 50% HP, does get some self-sustain and a bit of energy restoration as well. This is good, especially if you are clearing like hard content and you are realizing that you need a little bit more sustain in your team composition. So another niche set to build, but I think it's pretty good if you're interested too as well. Now let's jump into the planet ornaments, and of course first things first, let's talk about Fleet of Ageless. It gives her good amounts of HP, which is more survivability. She generally will meet 120 speed quite easily, as she does like to run speed in her substats or main stat for her boots. So you do get this 20% in total, or 8% allies attack increase and 12% max HP, the total benefit from Fleet of the Ageless. On top of that, you also are able to get this Space Sealing Station 24% attack buff quite easily as well. I think this is very in line with her buffing, scaling with attack. She wants to build generally more attack percentage so that she can maximize the amount of buffs she can give the team as well, or the member that she's buffing. The last but not least, I think Sprightly Von Whack is a pretty decent one. Increases the wearer's energy restoration rate by 5%, and when she enters the battle, immediately action advances herself by 40% if the wearer speed is above 120. Of course, again, note that this might mess up your turn order if you have specifically, for example, allocated who to go after who in terms of speed tuning as well. Main stats and substats. This is what I'm running for my Tingyun, and I will talk about the substats that I'm focusing on in a little bit as well. I'm running a 2-piece Sprightly Von Whack for, as mentioned, the energy restoration, Musketeer Wildbeat, nice speed, nice attack as well. The substats that I'm focusing on, mainly I'm looking for anything with speed, anything with attack percentage as well. I think these two are the highest priority. You could run crit rate if you wanted to. I think generally she has not really much high requirements. Speed attack is the most important tool that I will focus on as well. So in terms of the body of what I'm running here, I actually don't have an attack percentage, but I would want to switch to an attack percentage body instead in terms of the main stat. She's one of the only characters currently that doesn't mind not using a crit rate or crit damage in the main stat. So I think it's pretty useful that she helps diversify out your resource pool as well. So this, even though I'm using crit rate, think of it as attack percentage. I think it's much better to suit her overall playstyle as well. Crit is okay, but considering that she doesn't do a ton of damage in terms of the overall team composition, I think attack percentage might be more useful for her playstyle. Boots, I'm running speed. I think speed is tremendously important for her as well. It gives her more action advance, give her more energy restoration to buff, keep the uptime of the buffing, and she doesn't really need to use her skill like non-stop, especially if you're playing with a hyper carry. So more action advance means she's also able to generate more skill points for her teammates as well. In terms of the link rope, I would be running an attack percentage Planisphere for in terms of the main stat, and last but not least, link rope, I'm actually will be looking for an energy restoration rate. She doesn't really need attack percentage here because she gets it from a lot of other places already, so I think having a bit more sustain for herself in terms of keeping the uptime on her burst, very important. Combined together, Sprightly Von Whack is actually quite a significant amount of energy restoration as well. Optimal Lightcones for Tingyun. Her Lightcones actually can change quite a bit depending on what team composition she's in and the playstyle that you want to go after. But let's first talk about very simple stuff, the 3-star Lightcones. Mashing Cock I think is pretty decent, gives good amounts of energy when she attacks or gets hit. Chorus is also pretty good in terms of unconditional attack buff for the entire team. If you don't have a 4-star Lightcone yet, maybe you haven't gotten it or using it on someone else. But other than that, in terms of the Lightcones that we have, Planetary Rendezvous is a very specific Lightcone. If perhaps you're running with a lightning hyper carry kind of style in the same team, it's going to be very solid. For example, maybe you have Tingyun or Serval which you're trying to buff up, because they are lightning typing, is going to be really good for them in terms of Tingyun's Lightcone to use Planetary Rendezvous. Dance. Some of you might be wondering, because she's a hyper carry character, why does she need to buff the whole team rather just double down on one character? The idea behind all action advance forward, why it's still really solid and even good for a character that is like a single target buffer, is because when you buff your whole team means you have more skill point generations, more ability to sustain, means indirectly you have more energy restoration for the whole team because they act more as well, and indirectly also more damage coming from the whole entire party. So that's a reason why action advance is still really strong, even though it's in a Tingyun hyper carry state. So that is probably Dance. And out of all of them, I think in terms of like the 4 stars that I really like, I like Carve the Moon, Weave the Cloud the most on her. And this is of course very suited for her playstyle, because if you think about Tingyun, she's going to be buffing a hyper carry character. So even though some of these stats like crit damage and attack might not be as useful for your preservation or your sustained abundance characters, this gives a lot of stats to your main DPS, which is doing the bulk of the damage as well. And this is just unconditionally applied, it swaps between them, and I think it's a really solid Lightcone as well in terms of Carve the Moon with the Clouds. Probably, in my opinion, her best in slot 4-star if you don't really know what to play in general use. But the Lightcone I like better than the 4-star would definitely be Bronya's Lightcone, but the battle isn't over. This is not very easy to use, because if you look at this last part here, when you use the skill, your next ally taking actions deals 30% more damage. This means you have to speed tune your characters, and by speed tune I mean adjust the speed so that your DPS that you are wanting to buff with this Lightcone goes directly after Tingyun. So that is something to know. It gives nice energy restoration as well. And of course, if you have the lesser version, the past and future, this one is just a tiny version of that one, giving you also increased damage for the next ally taking action as well. Now let's talk about team comps for Tingyun. She's generally a hyper carry buffer kind of character, so she does like to play with characters like Tingyun, she does like to play with characters like Zila, And I think characters like Himiko or even Yanqing to some extent works really well with her too. These are characters that don't mind getting all the buffs because they do dish out quite a significant amount of damage in terms of the overall team damage that is being done. So let's just leave Tingyun here as a proxy for all hyper carry characters in the game. Other than that, I think she generally wants to play with a defensive unit, because with 2 offensive units like a support buffing her, she wants a character that is more or less like self-sustainable in terms of defensive ability, doesn't require too much speed buffing from Estar to help with their regeneration. I think characters like Gepard is quite nice, or Natasha is also pretty good because of a very low burst energy cost. So I'm going to put like more cheaper alternative here. You could of course play, for example, Bailu or Luota eventually if he comes out as this slot, a bit of sustain for the overall team. And last but not least, in terms of the hunt DPS, generally I would say that you want a single target damage dealer here, because if your hyper carry here is Tingyun or AoE, you want to just have the opposite. So if it's Zila, you want to have a AoE DPS here, depending on what it is. This AoE or this last slot is generally going to be neglected a little bit by Tingyun, because she's not going to be buffing that character specifically, more of like focusing on the hyper carry. So a character like Susang I think is really solid for independence, doesn't really care too much about getting buffs. Nice to have, but not like super reliant on it. As for the AoE counterpart that is really strong, I think Pella is also really good for AoE if you're running a single target hyper carry. The reason for that is Pella doesn't really need too much, and she offers a lot outside in terms of helping the hyper carry become even stronger. In this sense, Pella will be like the AoE DPS if you're running a hyper carry Zila, for example. And if you like such content, do check out these 2 other videos where I go more in depth in other team compositions or other build guides as well on the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.